Welcome to Regulatory Ready, how to use AI responsibly in insurance under the NAIC Model Bulletin. I'm Sam Fetro, and I work on the marketing team here at ZestyAI. We have a great panel for you today. Kevin Gaffney is the Commissioner of the Department of Financial Regulation and serves as the Chief Financial Regulator for the state of Vermont. He's also the chair of the NAIC Committee on Innovation, Cybersecurity, and Technology, which adopted the NAIC Model Bulletin on the use of artificial intelligence systems by insurers. He has a long tenure of public service as part of the Vermont Department of Financial Regulation, and prior to that, spent 23 years in the insurance industry, working in marketing, underwriting, and product management positions, including time as a multi-line insurance agent. And we have Bryan Rehor, the Director of Regulatory Strategy at ZestyAI. He's previously held various product management and pricing roles at Progressive and Travelers, most recently serving as Product Manager for California. He has extensive experience in collaborating with regulators, ensuring compliance, and advancing the use of AI in the insurance sector. So why is ZestyAI hosting this panel discussion? Well, ZestyAI has always prioritized regulatory compliance as a core aspect of our business philosophy. Since day one, we've recognized that navigating the regulatory landscape isn't just about meeting requirements, it's about building trust with our carrier partners, regulators, and the communities that ultimately benefit from our models. By proactively engaging with regulators and maintaining transparency, we make sure our models are not only cutting edge, but also responsible and reliable. ZestyAI is a property and climate risk analytics platform fueled by the power of data science. Our team of brilliant data scientists and engineers apply sophisticated AI and machine learning to vast data sets. We create both the raw ingredients that carriers use to build their own proprietary risk models and also have our own peril-specific risk models to address wildfire, severe convective storms, and interior water damage. Our solutions help insurance carriers write new business with precision, refine their rating models for fairer pricing, and optimize their portfolios for greater resilience. So we're here today to continue on that commitment to partnership on the regulatory front and to educate the market on the implications of the NAIC Bulletin and the discrete steps carriers can take to thrive while maintaining strong compliance. So to help our panelists tailor their responses to where you're at in your AI journey, we wanted to start with an audience poll question. So you'll see this pop up within Zoom. Let us know, where is your company on its AI adoption journey? Are you not currently using AI and have no plans to implement it? Are you planning to implement AI within the next year? Maybe you're in the pilot phase of using AI, or you've just started using AI in select use cases across your business. And perhaps some of you are already extensively using AI across multiple divisions. So let us know, where does your organization stand? And we'll reveal the results in about 30 seconds. Okay, here are the results. Looks like the almost half, 49%, using AI in select use cases across your business. Then we have 20% in the pilot phase, and then the remainder sort of spread across not using AI, planning to implement, or using it extensively. Bryan, you work with a ton of insurance carriers. Do any of these results surprise you, or is this kind of what you see in the industry?
No, there's no surprises here, Sam. This is exactly what I would have expected. And AI being so new, everybody's in a different part of their journey. But the thing to remember is now is the time, whether you're just getting started or whether you're really entrenched in AI, to really be thinking about the implications of this bulletin on your business practices.
Awesome. Thanks, Bryan. Well, let's get into our panel discussion. Let's start with Commissioner Gaffney, and then we'll pull in Bryan in just a bit. So tell us, Commissioner, what was the genesis of the NAIC Bulletin on AI, and how did you approach the problem?
Yeah, thanks, Sam, and thanks everyone for joining. Important discussion. I think even prior to the bulletin, the NAIC issued its AI principles under the work of the Big Data AI Working Group. And I think the recognition even 5 years ago was that the use of AI comes with a lot of opportunities, but it also comes with a lot of risks. So the NAIC kind of laid out in those principles, what regulated entities should be doing when they're using artificial intelligence systems. So in other words, focusing on the fair and ethical use, making sure that it's accountable, that it's compliant and transparent, and just laying out that initial foundation. Then fast forward to just under a year ago, the NAIC adopted the NAIC Model Bulletin, which laid out in much more detail now, the definitions, trying to define the terms of AI systems, laying out the legal authority that that already exists under Insurance Trade Practices Act, Fair Claims Practices Acts, and other state laws, and then kind of laid out kind of the governance framework for how we as regulators expect industry to be thinking about self-governance. It's certainly what we think as regulators is important to industry from what we will review and enforce, but it's also just, we wanted to be proactive. So this is a bulletin that is not prescriptive. It recognizes that there's different uses of AI for different entities. Just like that poll, it was funny, you probably would have saved me 2 years of work, Sam, if we had just done that poll. But the interesting thing about that poll is that the numbers are a little higher than what we did when we did our survey work. And that makes sense, right? I think that this marketplace is moving quickly. So, the bulletin kind of lays out that framework of, one, just having some written plan for how you're going to govern AI, and a process for testing, and a process for being auditable. So there's a whole host. So anyone who didn't see the bulletins issued by the 18 states, Iowa just adopted the bulletin, and then we have 4 other jurisdictions with existing authority. Look at the things like the press release. I issued a press release because I felt the bulletin was 9 pages, somewhat dense, and the press release just highlighted the things that we expect industry to follow in terms of governance. We want to be transparent with industry, just as we expect industry to be transparent with its consumers. We as regulators want to be transparent. We're not hiding the ball here. We're trying to call out what we think is important, and then work through the details of how we get there.
Well, thanks, Commissioner Gaffney. Really helpful to hear sort of the top line. Let's get a little bit more specific now. I'm sure top of mind for our audience, how do the principles align with those current state regulations, and how should carriers think about the bulletin in light of various regulations in each state?
Yeah, I think the existence of the existing law, unfair trade practices and fair claims settlement, they all have this overarching tenet of fairness and transparency and disclosure, all those things that we already expect in the marketplace. Now it's just dealing in a new area that is highly technical, and also may rely more on machines and models versus humans. So same principles already exist, and that may be why some states have not yet adopted the model bulletin, because they feel like they already have the authority under current law. But we are going to be surveying the state regulators to just see if their plan to adopt the bulletin. That's going to be getting a little preview for the Denver national meeting coming up in a few days. But that is something we'll be asking state jurisdictions.
That's helpful. Thanks, Commissioner Gaffney. Let's bring Bryan into the conversation. AI is a very broad topic. What are some common misconceptions about AI?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, Sam, and something that we get a lot from regulators as well as insurance carriers. So I think the first thing to understand is AI is just a new generation of modeling. And while AI is relatively new to the industry, modeling absolutely is not. And there have been, very, very clear guidelines over how to submit models for approval, and regulators have been doing this for, decades now. So let's think about AI as a new branch of modeling. What is a model? A model is simply just a way to relate inputs with outputs. So think of it as more of a recipe. So if you have a recipe for cookies, you have maybe butter, sugar, flour that are going into the recipe. Your output is going to be that cookie. So with more of the incumbent modeling techniques, let's use linear models, GLMs as an example. Creating a GLM is like putting together a recipe for cookies. Maybe you start with a stick of butter, 2 cups of flour, a cup of sugar, and then you see how that comes out. And then you can make tweaks to it. And over time, you'll eventually land that in your final cookie. And that's how linear modeling works. Now with machine learning, which is a branch of AI, we have computers doing this for us. We have computers going through many, many iterations and coming up with that perfect cookie much more efficiently. So that's really the difference here, is we have a much better way to come up with that cookie. So I think one big misconception here is that AI is just this one new type of technology. In fact, it's like Commissioner Gaffney mentioned, there are many sub-technologies underneath it. So let's go through a few of these. We have predictive AI. So predictive is really trying to take individual inputs, maybe it's data about a home, about a property, putting them together and trying to figure out what is the likelihood that you'll file a claim, and if so, how expensive is that claim going to be? So that's something that ZestyAI does very well, is creating using machine learning to predict claims. And then we have things like extractive technology. So maybe we have an aerial image and we use a computer vision model to extract information, such as is there a presence of a swimming pool or a trampoline, or measuring the total area of solar panels on the roof. So this is more of an extractive technology. We already have this in the industry. It's very commonplace. And then the third, emerging piece of AI is the generative AI. So this is what many people are hearing about when they hear ChatGPT. Generative AI is really something that creates content. So you provide a prompt and it comes up with text or an image. This is brand new. So this is really emerging today. It's definitely the newest to the industry versus the other two. So now that we understand kind of the overarching umbrella of AI, another common misconception that we hear is, oh, AI is a black box. You can't explain how it works. And that's not necessarily true. Let me give you some of the predictive technology examples. So, we use GBMs in order to predict the likelihood of a wildfire occurring for a particular property. So when we designed this, we had to really think about how can we explain to the homeowner and to the insurance carrier what are the inputs into the model that are most impactful on their score. So with a linear model, it's a little bit easier to do that, but there are statistical techniques in place to explain things like machine learning models and explain what are the variables that have the most impact. And then not only is that transparency to the customer, that also empowers that customer to be able to take mitigating steps on their property to potentially lower their risk. What can that do? Well, that can lower the insurance premiums that they pay. That can potentially even improve their insurability. So transparency is something that we had to really think about, but it does exist. And we file our models with regulators, and we enable regulators also to look into our models. And then I'll leave you with one more. There's a misconception that AI is always learning, and maybe we get this idea from the movies where the AI is learning and getting smarter and smarter, and suddenly outsmarts the humans. So that just couldn't be further from the truth in insurance. And like other models that we use in insurance, once a model is created, we lock that model, and that means that under the same set of inputs, you're going to expect the exact same output. That's super important, especially when you start building in AI-based pricing into your rating plans. Insurance carriers need to expect a stable distribution of risk. So if AI is changing behind the scenes and the outputs are suddenly drifting upwards or downwards, well, that can have an impact on your rates. So insurance carriers need a stable expected distribution of risks. And to accomplish that, once we create a model, we lock that model We file that model with regulators, and that model is going to be the same until we decide that we need to make updates, at which time we will go and refile the model. So there's a few misconceptions that we hear about AI.
Thanks, Bryan. And we're going to spend more time in a little bit on transparency, explainability, some of the topics you brought up. And now, unfortunately, I'm kind of hungry for cookies. But let's stick with you, Bryan. You work with many carriers, and so you have a lot of you've heard a lot about this model from your industry partners. I'm curious, from your perspective, how has the industry reacted to the bulletin? Are there any common questions that you get from your carrier partners?
Yeah, I think the number one question I get is, how are you, ZestyAI, as an AI model vendor, going to support us in this bulletin? So my answer to them always is, it always starts with the insurance carrier. So like Commissioner Gaffney in the bulletin explained, one of the first steps that insurance carriers need to take is establishing a written AI program. So that governance is super, super important, because that's going to hold you accountable. It's going to dictate how you're going to use AI responsibly, whether you're using it today or whether you're going to use it in the future. So once you have that governance in place, that's when you can turn to ZestyAI as your partner to enable you to carry out that governance. So, for example, a great governance plan might have requirements for auditability, so being able to audit the solution, or there might be requirements for documentation. So being able to go back to a model and figure out, all right, how did you actually go from that image to that output? So these are some ways that ZestyAI can support you, because we take transparency and disclosure very, very seriously. We file all of our model documentation with regulators. It's all available for public inspection. The same is going to be true, in the future, when say you license one of our models, and you need to look back at something and be able to audit how something was actually performed. So that's something that we're going to be able to do to support your governance. Another area is standing with the department. So we actually have licensed ourselves as an advisory organization or a rating organization, depending on the state, in many, many states. And what this does is it gives us standing with the department. So now, if a DOI decides to open up an investigation, or do a market conduct exam, you now have some recourse, because your vendor has that standing with the department. They have that pre-established relationship. The department has the means to go and do the work that they need to do. So that's going to be super important when it comes to potential future regulatory implications or examinations.
Great, thanks, Bryan. Let me ask the same question to Commissioner Gaffney. What type of feedback are you getting from the insurance industry?
Yeah, I think we still get questions. Sometimes I'm at panels and we have presentations, and then I get the side discussion about, well, what does this really mean? I say, well, it pretty much means what it says. And I think, Bryan, you highlighted some of those key areas. We're, at least from my vantage point, as the way I regulate here in Vermont, and I think I also tried to effectuate good consensus regulation at the NAIC, is not to set up any regulatory tripping stones. We're trying to be transparent. So having that written plan, I think you touched on a lot of key areas, Bryan, in terms of auditability, and this licensure thing is not necessarily settled, but I can just tell you from my vantage point, I appreciate Bryan's comments about filing these with the state regulator, because and Bryan talked about the models being locked, but then of course maybe data shows different information that requires updates to that model, so then those updates get filed. And I think having that access as the regulator, again, those are filed under our law, as the model would be confidential under our law, so it promotes the filing of these models, but it also allows us as regulators to see the continuum changes and, maybe ask questions if we have any as there's changes to the model and asking for the supporting data for those changes. So, so those are a few of the areas. I guess the other thing I just wanted to reflect on from the earlier conversation is, just AI and the innovation and talking about predictive value and risk mitigation. Certainly, those are front of mind for us as regulators. So again, the advent of technology to assist in those areas, we're always very interested in. And actually, a few years ago, Vermont updated, as many states have, their rebating laws. And it allows for what we call value-added services. So these can be products or services that help mitigate loss or add better value or ways to reduce someone's risk and ultimately the cost of insurance. So those are areas that we are very much trying to promote as regulators as we try to solve the fair and ethical use of AI, but also leverage the benefits that it brings.
Makes sense. Well, Commissioner Gaffney, another one for you. What are some common misconceptions about the bulletin? Or maybe in other words, what is the bulletin not trying to do?
Yeah, I think what the bulletin's not trying to do is it recognizes that there's not a single specific solution for all, but it is, I think, trying to be very clear in what everyone should be preparing. If you don't have a written plan or you haven't had at least meetings from the C-suite to the board to the operational areas to compliance to the data analysts and the actuaries, you should be having those. And so what it's not is not prescriptive. What it will become, I think, over time is it will convert to some principles and metrics that either convert to different examination practices, and I think Bryan kind of touched on that. We have examination authority. Well, with that authority, those that are regulated by state insurance regulators need to be able to explain what they're doing and how they're doing it and how they're doing it in a fair and ethical way.
Makes sense. Well, let's get into some best practices now for our audience. And we'll go through several areas of the NAIC Model Bulletin on the use of artificial intelligence systems by insurers and cover 3 topics and just dive into those best practices. So we'll cover explainability, transparency, and then the validation and ongoing monitoring. So we'll start with Bryan for each of these best practices and then turn to the commissioner. So Bryan, let's start with explainability. How can carriers ensure their models are explainable to regulators and policyholders, especially when using complex AI algorithms?
Yeah, it's a great question. And ZestyAI has been involved with dozens of model filings across many states in the US. So I think we've learned quite a few things about, how do you actually take a machine learning based risk model and file it and explain it to regulators in a way that is going to allow them to review the model and understand the model, but also in a way that protects our own IPs and it doesn't enable replication. So I think we've kind of found, the best practices. Most states do have substantial IP protection laws, and models and documentation can be filed confidentially. The intent is not to withhold any information from the public. It's really to avoid replication of that model. So what we've been able to do is really explain everything about that model in that confidential format. And like I mentioned at the beginning with that with my cookie recipe, it's really explaining everything about that recipe and how you go from input to output. So it really starts with explaining every input into the model. So where did we source the data from? How did we verify that the data is accurate? How did we clean it? What years and states was the data collected from? So those are the ingredients. And then, the baking of the cookies. So how did all the ingredients come together? Well, we can explain a lot about how each individual input into the model influences the final score and how they interact with each other. So there's many, statistical exercises that we can demonstrate to show what is the relationship between input and output. And then a lot of questions that we can answer about how is this model going to be utilized by insurance carriers? What happens If somebody disagrees with their score, how are you going to enable that customer to go to their carrier and maybe correct an input or fill in a missing input? So it's really comes down to disclosing everything we can about the model and opening up the regulator to ask those questions. So if they have some basic documentation about the model, then they can start asking those questions about how it works, and then we overall enable a very thorough understanding of the model, so that when it comes time for a carrier to license the model, we've already answered all the questions about it. The focus can then be on the application of the model in their rating plan or in their underwriting rules.
Disclosure, disclosure, disclosure.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Gaffney, anything to add on model explainability?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing I would just add is regulators are always open to pre-filing discussions too. I think it can be very helpful to just engage in those. So our doors are always open to talk through those things. I think it ultimately helps the filer to be more efficient in what they're filing, what they're trying to affect, and probably results in fewer questions during the filing, especially if it's novel. If it's something that you've already had in the market and you're just updating, it's probably not the case that you need to do that. But I think if it's novel, and a lot of this is novel, I encourage to have that dialogue. I was just on a panel with several other commissioners at a conference, and that was the kind of the recurring theme is, reach out to us ahead of time, ask the questions you need to ask. I think the confidentiality protection, Bryan, you touched on that, and it's important for us as regulators to have a full view into what's happening, but also then convert that to an assurance to the public that we are on the job, we're reviewing these, we're making sure that companies are acting in a compliant manner, and we can't do that without that confidentiality protection. But I just wanted to call out, just reaching out to us first, because sometimes filers can identify something as a trade secret and confidential that may not quite be that. So it's important to just make sure you kind of get that piece right.
Thanks for that. Let's move to topic 2 on best practices, transparency, often cited as a challenge with AI. So how can carriers ensure their models are transparent to regulators and to policyholders of what the output is?
My answer to that is it just absolutely cannot be an afterthought. You need to build transparency into your design of the model. So back when we were working on our ZFire model, ZFire is our flagship wildfire predictive risk model. We were rolling that out in California. And at the time, there was a lot of emerging regulations that were coming out that were requiring insurance carriers to be transparent to the homeowner over what are the factors that are driving their score and empower those homeowners to lower their score through mitigation. So we really had to think about how are we going to explain how a machine learning model is impacting a customer's risk score. So we actually arrived at an idea. We use what's called the Shapley values, and that explains what are the most impactful individual features on a customer's risk score. And then we take these features and we pass them on to the insurance carrier. So we actually embed that information in an API. So the carrier can now take that information and put it in a customer-facing letter. They can look at those reasons on our UI and explain to the customer what they can be doing. So it was something that wasn't really an afterthought. It was something that we really had to build in. And the same thing is definitely happening in other states. I mean, Oregon has similar regulations requiring transparency into risk scores. We see states like Pennsylvania and Connecticut that recently issued bulletins that are requiring more transparency over the use of aerial imagery. So I think transparency, this trend that we've been on, it's not going to reverse itself. So whether you're building your AI in-house or you're going to outsource that tech to a vendor like ZestyAI, it absolutely needs to be something you're thinking about today.
Thanks, Bryan. Commissioner Gaffney.
Yeah, I think you highlighted all the real critical issues. I guess one additional thing to think about is, that this transparency is not just consumer-facing transparency, but we as regulators need to understand what's happening, because we get reach outs from our legislature and the media on just what's happening in this space, and we have to be able to speak to those. So there's a lot of necessity for us to have a full view into what's happening, and if it can't speak, if the filing can't kind of stand on its own and speak to what's happening, it's just not going to pass muster with the regulator. I think what you're articulating, Sam, is really what we want to convey to both our regulated entities, to the third parties that service those entities. It's critically important and I was just in a meeting today with a legislator on just these very topics of what's happening in somebody's policy and why. So I think transparency, whether it's with the use of AI or not, is always going to be front of mind for regulators.
Definitely. All right, last best practice area, validation and continuous monitoring. So Bryan, what are some best practices for carriers to ensure their models are thoroughly validated, accurate, aligned to regulatory expectations, and then applying continuous monitoring to remain compliant?
Yeah, great question, Sam. And it all comes down to the data that you're using to build your model. Modelers need to ensure that we're using a diverse data set. So when I say diverse, I mean data that is taking a lot of different types of properties into account, a lot of different state exposure into account. And that way, we're making sure that we're not overfitting the model to any one particular region or maybe type of home. So we absolutely validate our model on a countrywide basis. But a question that we commonly get from regulators is, show us that your model that you built with countrywide data actually works and is predictive in our state. We couldn't do that if we didn't have the data from each state and have a diverse data set. So it comes to building that diverse data set from the start. And then I think it also comes down to ongoing validation. So I'm going to go back to our ZFire product. So we built this data using a few decades of wildfire and loss data from the Western U.S. We also take our model and test it against new wildfire events. So every time we have a new wildfire season, we're looking to make sure that our model continues to validate and that it continues to be predictive. Once we start seeing that our model's losing a little bit of shelf life or predictive power, that's when we go back to the drawing board and we start thinking about creating a version 2 of the model. So far, that hasn't happened yet, but that's something that's very important, is to make sure that a model that you built on old data, you can't assume that it's going to have shelf life forever. It's going to go stale, and you need to be thinking about, what is your version 2 of that model going to look like? So validation at the beginning. Get a wide variety of data in your data set. That make sure it validates at a regional level as well as on a countrywide level, and then continue to validate that on unseen data.
That was great. Thanks, Bryan. Commissioner Gaffney, anything to add on validation and continuous monitoring?
Yeah, well, I think the validation and the input data, that's kind of the critical piece of this. It's the I'm not going to try to make a recipe for cookies here, but it really is what are the ingredients going in, and how are they validated. But I like what Bryan said about not only validation, but kind of that ongoing calibration, just to make sure the model's still acting as expected. And I guess lastly, just the regional piece is an important aspect, because there's a lot of natural disaster events that are impacting various parts of the country, but not necessarily all. So when we get these models that introduce something into our markets, we just want to make sure that it's appropriate for the market that it's being utilized. And so both, someone like ZestyAI or the other regulated entities that may utilize their models, we want to see the application and how it's being applied.
Makes sense. Okay, last question for our panel, and then we'll get to the Q&A section. Commissioner Gaffney, tell us what's next on the docket for the NAIC committee that you lead.
Yeah, so the NAIC, I'm chair of the H committee, the Innovation Cybersecurity Technology Committee. There's a number of things on the docket in the cybersecurity space. We're certainly dealing with some real-time cybersecurity events, and so as the chair of H committee, I'm working very closely with the chair of D committee, which is the market regulation committee, on, what should, when we have systemic cybersecurity events, what should the response plan be at the NAIC, or how should the impacted entities coordinate that response in a maybe a more of a countrywide basis with the NAIC rather than being come at by 56 jurisdictions. So still more to come on that, but I think you're going to hear a little bit more in Denver. So those of you that can join virtually or in person, you can listen in on that. I think there's also just, one of the groups under the H committee is the third party working group, and certainly looking at, the proper principles and practices on how our regulated entities manage their third party arrangements. So again, part of that is already in the AI bulletin, but it is important that that you have an ability to audit your third party vendors and the work that they're doing, as Bryan was highlighting earlier. And obviously the ongoing work of the big data AI working group as we continue to survey the marketplace. So we're in our last major line of insurance, although there'll probably be 2 iterations of the health insurance survey, but we are looking right now at health insurance. And as we do these surveys, we don't just put them together in a vacuum as regulators. We actually engage with industry, so we do pilot work and actually have at least 5 to 8 different companies of different kind of complexity, maybe insurtechs and incumbent companies, to find out actually how they're using AI. And what we found as we do each of these is that there's just a slightly different approach with each line of insurance. And certainly the insurance business cycle is different with health insurance. So we're modifying the survey to be reflective of what will be helpful for us to know as regulators, and how those findings can be helpful to the public. So certainly more to come on that. I would say lastly, it's under the evaluations systems work stream, which is actually going to be under the Big Data AI Working Group. That we just had a call yesterday, a public call to announce that, and we just felt that was a good place for that to get folded into. But that will do the hard work now of converting the principles of the AI bulletin to some metrics, to some processes, whether it's an addendum to the market conduct annual statement or other market conduct handbook addendums. So more to come on that. And I guess I would say, as we do within the NAIC, it's a very transparent process. So we're going to get the input from industry. We're going to get input from consumer groups as we move in that direction.
That's great. Thank you, Commissioner Gaffney. Thank you, Bryan. Great discussion. Now we're moving into the Q&A portion. So this is your last chance to get your questions in. Hit that Q&A button within Zoom. All right, with that, let's get to the Q&A. Bunch of questions in. Get through as many as we can. First one up, this is an anonymous question. What information might be requested during an examination regarding AI services? Maybe we'll send that to Commissioner Gaffney.
Sure, and thanks for the question. I think the specific questions are still a work in progress, but I think it's not going to be a surprise that the questions will be very closely tied to the governance principles. So, so it really depends on what it is that's being used in the market, and and those questions will be, relevant to that. But I would say, just, do you have a written plan? Do you have an overall governance framework? How do you test? How do you assess your input data? How do you test for outcomes? Now, I know the outcomes is always a challenging part, and I would say on that front, you know, we're still looking at things like inference methods like BISFG, you know, to look at ways to kind of test your outputs and outcomes to ensure fair outcomes to consumers. So there's more on that, but I think we'll be hearing actually some examples that are happening in the marketplace in the special committee on race and insurance. Actually, I chair the P&C work stream, so another advertisement for Denver.
It's great. Sort of a similar question. Maybe I'll go to Bryan on this one. What should a carrier ask from vendors providing AI services?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things you can be doing to make sure that the vendors that you're working with are fully vetted. So I think number one thing is this vendor transparent enough today with how they build their models? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? How do the models work? That you're going to be confident when there is a market conduct exam, maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the road, that vendor is going to be transparent with the regulator. So I think that's the number one thing you can be asking, and that transparency is something that you know, again, it can't be an afterthought. It has to be something that is a cornerstone of how that vendor operates. That's why ZestyAI you know, takes transparency very, very seriously. We file everything with the regulators. The regulators already understand how our model works everywhere that we file it. So, so that is something that you want to be looking for is that transparency. And then again, it comes down to your written AI governance. So, how are you going to, you know, dictate the use of AI across your enterprise? And then you'll be able to ask, you know, of your model vendor, you know, hey, we require auditability of all solutions. So have some of those, you know, pieces of the governance framework are things that you can be asking when you vet your vendors.
Thanks, Bryan. Okay, got one for Commissioner Gaffney. This is a question from Tim Donahue. Should we regulate the different types of AI? We talked about predictive, extractive, generative. Should we regulate them in a similar way? Should they have different levels of scrutiny by regulators? What do you think?
I think that they all fall into the general principles. I think as we've done the survey work under the H committee, under Big Data AI, we didn't really have as much focus on Gen AI with the auto survey, but we certainly are now with the current surveys. So we've expanded the surveys, and it does remind me that we are actually going back now and realizing it's going to be, you know, going on more than 2 years since the private passenger auto survey. So we're actually resurveying. I think this work, I mean, things move so fast in this space that we as regulators have to try to keep pace. So we're going to be resurveying. We're going to try to do it in an efficient manner, so it's not a burden. But I think this is going to be an ongoing process. So I would just say the concept of a human in the loop with these technologies has to be articulated at some point. There can't be just a set it and forget it, and there isn't actual human kind of oversight and governance. So I think regardless of the type of technology, we'll be looking for those type of practices.
Makes sense. This one's from Bryan. It's a scope question. He says he understands AI models and systems. What about like IT tools or tools that help you code faster? What do you think about a scope for that, Commissioner Gaffney?
I mean, I think you know, I think I'd have to look at those, but I think you know, if there's tools that help you process things in a certain way or a certain efficiency, I guess we'd have to look at what they are actually doing and how they would impact consumers, how they're consumer impacting. So probably need a little more information on that, but I think we're always open to understanding more about these different technologies. I think Bryan talked earlier about, you know, a GLM and then these AI. You know, when we started the survey with auto, we didn't really ask a lot of GLM questions because we had already been reviewing those for some time. But then we realized in some of the other lines of insurance, the GLM activity was a little more novel, and we did. So I think any technologies that are used in the application of delivering services, claim settling, processing, pricing, we're going to have to look at those.
Thanks for that. This one might be a good one for Bryan. This is from Raymond. How do you think about vendor-provided models versus an insurer model, and the transparency and compliance? Would a carrier have less visibility into a vendor model?
Yeah, so this is a question that we actually posed to NAIC. So we've been talking with NAIC, for many months now. And one thing that was made very, very clear to me is it doesn't matter whether you build your technology in-house or whether you outsource that to a vendor, the same rules are going to apply. So you're not going to be able to hide behind, working with a vendor and not understanding how things work because they haven't been fully transparent. So my answer to that is it doesn't really matter. That's why you need to be making sure that the vendors that you are working with are going to be fully transparent and are going to allow that auditability. Because once market conduct examinations start coming up in a few years, you need to be working with a vendor that provided that information from the get-go. So does not matter whether you build or buy, transparency is definitely key.
I see the commissioner nodding his head on that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's obviously business cases for build versus buy. So both can make sense depending on the entity's needs and use case. But regardless, it doesn't alleviate the responsibility of the regulated entity to understand. So if you're feeling like you're in a relationship with a vendor that's vague and not transparent, then you need to look at your own governance standards and challenge that relationship. It's not going to serve you well if you don't understand.
Well, thanks so much, panelists. We're at 2:50. There are more questions. We'll follow up with you after, try to get your questions answered. Thank you so much to our panelists, to our attendees. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to stay connected. Bryan and Kevin's contact information is below. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.